Hey everyone, today we're going to go over the essential checklist that I think you need to follow to become a gigging musician. So, this checklist is more geared towards if you're aspiring to become like a sideman or just like a person for hire for gigs. And yeah, so let's get into it. So, I think the first thing that you should work on, like let's say you got the set list ahead of time and you have some time to prepare, but maybe not like a whole lot of time. So, just trying to learn things efficiently. But first thing is to put together a playlist of the tunes on like Spotify or something, um, that you can just listen to the tunes very easily just by entering the playlist and listening to it. Because the first skill you want to develop is knowing the melody, becoming familiar with melody. Ideally, you want to be able to hum the melody, okay? So, this if you're not a singer, do not worry about this. This skill we're trying to develop is not to be able to sing it well, but just for something your mind can latch onto. It's the same muscle we're trying to develop, like when you're trying to, let's say, actors are trying to memorize like lines in a movie or something, where it's more helpful to say the lines out loud so your brain can actively engage with the words than you're saying than just reading on paper and just hoping that you're going to remember it. Your brain works better if you utilize as many senses as possible. So if you're saying something out loud, you're actually hearing yourself saying it and just like imagining the words in your mind. So, it could just be something, I don't know, like Valerie, I'm just gonna hum it. Ba ba da ba 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 Valerie. Valerie, won't you come on over, Valerie? Okay, just something like that, just so you're actually familiar with the individual sections of the tune. That was the verse, pre chorus, and chorus that I was humming there. So that'd be the first skill that you want to develop because everything else is going to be built off of knowing the melody, the chord progression, the form, whatever. It all comes down to knowing the melody. And you don't even need to know how to play it. So just being able to hum it is enough. Obviously, there are advantages to learning the melody on the guitar. It can help your soloing. It can help you build like chord melody arrangements, blah, blah, blah. But, if you're just getting hired as a sideman for a gig, you just need to know the song well enough where you can hum. All right. So that'd be the first skill that I think you should develop. Now, the next skill that you want to develop is knowing your parts, okay? Now, this is not the same as just looking at like a real book and just memorizing the chord progression and just being like, I'm just going to play these chords right here and I'm just going to play quarter notes through it. That's not enough. If you do that, you're probably going to get fired from the gig. So, the first thing is like before you actually even start learning the actual chords, learn the actual parts that are important for your role. Okay, so let's say we're taking the tune Respect by Aretha Franklin. So if we're learning Respect, we know that the first chord is going to be something like, and then, so for that, what are you learning there? You're actually not learning the chord hits. You could go without that. The band and the keyboards are probably going to hit those chords for you. So really all you need to learn is, now as you're going through that, try and make a note of what those chords are. So in this case, we have C dominant. So we have this lick right here. All right. And then we have the second lick. Okay? I'm not going to go over how to play each of these specific parts. This is just like more something that you can mold to whatever you're learning. Okay, so that'd be the first thing I would learn on the tune. Those parts are guitar parts. It's not just chords that the piano or guitar is playing. These are actual parts, if you listen to the recording, that the guitarist is playing, okay? Now, in a lot of different versions that you'll hear of the tune, there'll be horns to go along with that, horn hits. But at its very base, it's a guitar part, okay? So you need to learn that. That's very important. And it's not really a negotiable thing. You know, if you don't play that when you're playing it live, you're probably not going to get hired back, or you're probably going to get scolded at by the band leader. Hopefully not scolded. Hopefully they're more constructive than that. But regardless, you should learn it. All right. Now, the next thing you should learn is kind of going along with the parts of the tune is the chord progression with it. And more importantly, in a way that feels good in a live setting, okay? So that means, like, you know, going back to respect, yeah, maybe you can play a C7 right there, but it's probably better to play like more of a shell voicing of it, you know, where I guess this is not technically shell voicing, but it's just a smaller, more concise version of the chord. You know, instead of playing this entire thing right here, which if you're playing with like keys, horn section, whatever, it's probably not going to sit super well in the mix. It's going to be super basic. Unless you do a really good job with your like 16th notes mixing up the you know, kind of mixing in those bass notes occasionally instead of just going. That's going to be pretty muddy in the mix. So yeah, either just change up your strumming where you're not hitting all 6 strings at the same time, or just make the chords smaller, okay? Both of those are great options for playing along. And also, you know, you don't have to stick to just the recording. It's good to learn that, you know, during the verse, we're just going, over G7. What you want? Baby, I got it. What you need? No, I got it. Now, hitting the tune 4 is a good idea, especially maybe if it's like the first verse of the tune, you know, just to give yourself something to build off of. You know, if you kind of go out of the gate. You know, you're already kind of like in like, you know, 4th gear or something there. You're not really giving yourself room to build off of that. So try to think thematically, okay? Or yeah, thematically. So maybe you start with one thing, do something slightly different the next time. So there's always this build in the tune. All right, so that's a great thing to learn. You know, and then just like different things like how long are the intros for the tune? Kind of going back to Valerie. You know, that first thing that you hear is the drums kick in. And the drums play for like 4 beats. I think the bass kicks in maybe after the first measure or two. I forget, but doesn't really pertain to the guitar part. But still, you have 4 bars where the band is just grooving, kicking up the tune. And then you have Amy kicking with the vocal, and that's 8 bars right there, okay? So, you know, you're keeping track in your head. You know, you can even listen to the recording and just be like, literally just like, it's like almost like child shit, you know. You're just like counting the fingers on your hand as you're listening to it. There's not a magic skill we're developing here. It's just counting. All right, so yeah, 4 bars in the intro, 8 bars in the first verse. All right, and then you have 8 bars in the pre-chorus. You know, since I come home, and my body's been a mess. Blah 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 blah. Ba da 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 da. You know, that entire part is 4 bars. Then you have an 8-bar chorus, okay? So now what I'm doing there is not the actual guitar part being played on the recording. It's actually a combination of the chords that are underlying the progression. So in this case, E flat major 7, F minor 7. But what I'm also doing is learning the horn part underneath it, because not every time you play with a band there's going to be a horn section. You know, I've played in GB bands where there's not a horn section with every band. So your job as the guitarist, and this should be the keyboardist part as well, or job as well, is to learn the horn parts in a way that feels good in the mix. So in this case, maybe just doing like... So what I'm doing there is I'm just playing the chord and then seeing where the horn parts lie within the context of the chord. That way I can play the chords and the horn parts at the same time. So it's basically as full as possible while outlining that part, okay? Now, along with learning, definitive parts of the tune, learning how many measures or the actual form of the tune with the actual chord progression, it's good to know the Roman numerals of the tune. That way you can transpose the tune. Like that tune Respect earlier. Aretha has like a pretty high range even for female vocalists. So it's not uncommon for you to hear that tune like half a step or whole step lower, And as far as like learning tunes in different keys, yes, I think as a long-term goal, it's good to learn the songs in as many keys as possible. But more often than not, the keys being lowered, let's say it's a female vocalist trying to sing a female song, like Respect. More often than not, they're just going to lower the key by half step, whole step, maybe a minor third, just because they can't hit the same high notes that Aretha has, okay? So, in my experience, yes, learn the song in different keys, but maybe just learn them like half a step, whole step lower, minor third lower, whatever. Just because, like, more often than not, the singer is singing a different key just because they can't hit the same high notes that the original has, okay? So, this is where learning the song in Roman numerals comes in, okay? Now, Roman numerals, I'm not going to get into it. There's many other lessons that are for this, including on my own page. But like in the case of Respect, the song begins on, I'll just go through like the intro. This is the 1. That's the 4. 1, 4. And then we go to the 5, to 4. And these are all dominant chords. You can play triads, but the actual sound is bluesy. It's dominant chords. So that's 5, 4, 5, 4 the entire time, okay? For a certain amount of measures, I could hum out the melody and figure out, but I'm not going to do that right now. But yeah, that's 5, 4, and then the chorus progression is 1 to the 4. Back to the verse, okay? Now that's good because let's assume that you have all your major scales memorized. If I'm performing this key in B flat, which I've actually done before, then yes, you can look at it as like, all right, I'm just taking the same chord shapes and just moving it down a couple frets at a time. But that's kind of just like, almost just like kind of dumb guitar mentality. It works, but down the road, you want to develop skills as an actual musician, not just a guitarist. Like, oh, if I put it down 2 frets, then I'm just changing keys. No, you want to learn that, like, all right, this F7 is actually the 5 chord in B flat. This E flat 7 is actually the 4 chord in B flat. And B flat, of course, being the 1. Because, if you do run into a situation where the key change is more drastic, like up a 4th, it might sound kind of messed up to play these chords, up here. Like if they're doing it in the key of F, for instance, and I'm playing the C up here, just using like moving up down frets by transposing it, then it's gonna sound kind of weird if I'm just playing. It might sound better if I'm just going. Okay, so something like that. All right. And then the other thing going on with the chord progression is try to learn things in a way that sound full in a live setting without re- basically don't learn parts as you hear on the studio recording a lot of times, because a lot of times they're overdubbing guitar parts. And a good example of that is I was teaching a student Glycerine by Bush last week. And, admittedly, I just looked up a tab of it real quick. I could figure out the tune. It's actually just a simple 1-6-5-4 tune. But, I was just trying to be quick about it, so I looked up the parts on Ultimate Guitar. And one thing I found really interesting is that the guitars were actually separated in two different parts. The first part was just going. Alright. So just like 2-string power chords. But when I was listening to the recording, I'm like, it sounds like there's something going on in that. So I looked at the other guitar part, and the other guitar part was more like. So you're like taking the same chord that you could easily play as one guitar player, but you're dividing it into different parts. Which, if I had to guess, they're probably doing it just as a way to make the part sound bigger. Because even if you're like taking a part that could easily be played by one guitarist, maybe they're panning it left and right in the stereo portion of the song. But regardless, that if you didn't know any better, or if you weren't as experienced, you might learn that part, and it will sound thin. It won't sound as full, especially if you're playing with a live band. So what I would recommend doing at that point is looking up a live recording of that. Okay. Now, when I looked up a live recording of that, the guitarist / singer in that, you could very clearly see he was playing like this F bar chord, but it was more of like a partial F bar chord. He's really just playing down to the 3rd string. Now, when I was looking at the other chords, I noticed it was this on the bottom and then these 2 strings on top. So basically the 3 strings, but these on top, which the occasional 3rd fret on the 2nd string, which actually alludes to a sus2 chord. Sounds very 90s. So to play that as a single guitar player, you'd be like, all right, I'm just going to play the lower strings on the bottom, and then on the accented notes, I'm going to play the higher string. So separating the 2 guitar parts to give the illusion that you're playing 2 different parts, where in fact, you're just one guitar player. Okay? So yeah, so far, just to recap, learning the melody, being able to hum it is huge, okay? Second thing is learning the important parts for the tune. So like respect, learning that part. The next thing is learning the chord progression, the form of the tune, what chords you're playing, how long are you playing the chords, how many sections of the tune are there, how many verses, how many choruses, that sort of thing. Being able to remember all that, okay? Now, the next thing is learning any parts to fill up the space, which you can kind of divide into 2 different sections, in my opinion. So the first part is like, if the song has horns and you're not playing with a band that has horns, learn the horn parts underneath the chords, like Valerie. Something like that, okay? The other thing is, like, if there's 2 guitars playing on the studio recording and you're trying to learn it from the recording, that might not be the best strategy, especially if the guitar parts are separated where they might sound thin individually. So look up a live recording. If there's only 1 guitarist on the live recording, but there's numerous guitars on the studio recording, the live recording, they have to figure out a way to compensate for all that. Combine maybe multiple guitar parts into the same guitar part just to make it sound more full. That's always a good idea. Okay? Now, and then the last thing, just so you can change keys within the same song is learning the Roman numerals or Nashville notation, whatever that goes with the recording. Okay, so that's really important. So you can change keys, which I've had to do with like literally seconds to rack before playing the next song. I play with bands where I don't really have a set list given ahead of time. They just call tunes on the fly, and the assumption is that you just know the tune well enough that you can change keys on the fly too. Okay, so that's a really good skill to have. And yeah, if you master those skills, with each tune, you're gonna be really valuable as a guitarist for hire. Okay, and you notice how none of this involves like soloing. Okay, oftentimes as a guitarist, you're not getting hired for your soloing abilities. It can be a good bonus to have, but you gotta know the tune. Okay, you gotta know the basic outline of the tune, know the horn parts, know the chord progression, know how to make yourself sound full as one guitarist, even if the original recording has multiple guitarists. So just learning that. Okay, and then after you do all that, maybe get a little bit more granular. Maybe learn how to solo over it in a way that sounds stylistically more important. And also, now that I'm on the topic of soloing, like let's take Don't Stop Believin'. That is a solo I would learn note for note. Okay, if you're playing that with a band, learn that solo note for note. Okay, some songs you might get a little bit more leeway because it just might not be. Some solos are just iconic, like that Don't Stop Believin' solo is really iconic. It's memorable. You'll see people like humming it as they were listening to the tune because it's really well known. It's melodic and it's really not that hard. So that solo, even though it's a guitar solo, I consider it more of a part. That solo I would consider more of a part than a solo, just because it's that important to the tune. Okay, so yeah, if you take all those things that I talked about, you will make yourself really marketable as a sideman. Okay, and from there you can always build. You can always learn what the actual guitar parts are. You can that might not be quite as important as the other parts I was talking about, but you can always learn more based off of a good foundation than just trying to like take on too much. So like if you're trying to learn specific parts on a really granular level, you're probably not learning tunes quickly. And if you're not learning tunes quickly, you're probably not going to get hired as much. So it's really important. It's a very fine line between learning enough information to get through the gig and sound good than it is to get too granular and take like 1 week to learn one tune. That's too slow. But you also don't want to do the other thing where you're just like looking at a song like Respect and be like, oh, it's just C7. I just do this the entire time while neglecting parts. Like, you gotta learn the defined parts of the tune. Okay, so that's like a non-negotiable. All right, now I think that's gonna do it for today. That covers just about everything I wanted to do to market yourself as a gigging musician for hire. Okay, so anyways, if you're new to the channel, a lot of times I focus on learning open E, slide, and things like that. But just with like what my students are learning nowadays, I find these skills I'm talking about today come up more and more often. And, learning open tuning and slide is not everything. You got to learn to be a musician first, okay? So yeah, if you're new to the channel, you probably have seen I do a lot of videos in open E, but I'm going to start expanding my horizons, doing more stuff in standard tuning, covering more stuff, tunes that are just not in the blues rock genre that I love talking about. But I'm still going to incorporate all that. I'm not steering completely clear from that, but when I make these lesson videos, I try to draw inspiration from what I'm currently teaching students at the time, and this was one of the things that was on my mind this week. So yeah, please like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, leave a comment, maybe comment what you would like to see next from me. And yeah, I will see you guys soon. Have a great week.